Hello there, and welcome to the world of fortified wines. Today we are stepping away from standard table wines and looking at a category that was born out of necessity, but evolved into a true art form. If we look back in history, fortification, the act of adding grape spirit to wine, wasn't originally a stylistic choice. It was a survival strategy. Wine is fragile. If you tried to ship a barrel of wine from Spain or Portugal to England centuries ago, the heat, the movement, and the oxygen would often turn it into vinegar before it arrived. The solution? Add spirit. Raising the alcohol level killed off the bacteria and yeast acting as a preservative. But here's the fascinating part. Consumers didn't just tolerate this preserved wine. They fell in love with it. They developed a taste for the structural power, the sweetness, and the intense complexity that comes from high alcohol and specific aging regimens. Let's dive in. Okay, today we are going to break down the three giants of this category that are defined in the Level 3 wine specification. Sherry from Spain, port from Portugal, and the global category of Fortified Muscats. We will examine the natural factors like climate and grapes, but more importantly, we are going to focus on the human factors, the specific winemaking choices that define style, quality, and price. Now let's start with the most complex aging system maybe in the world, sherry. Now sherry is a style that is defined by its aging process. It is produced in southern Spain, specifically around the town of Jerez de la Frontera. Now as far as our natural factors, climate and the grapes, the climate here is a hot, sunny Mediterranean climate. Vines here have to survive intense heat and limited rainfall. To do this, they rely on a unique soil called albariza. This chalky soil has a high water holding capacity, and it crusts over in the summer heat, trapping winter rainfall underground for the vines to access. And while there are 3 permitted grapes, the undisputed king for dry sherry is Palomino. This is a grape with naturally low acid and very little varietal flavor. And that is exactly what the winemaker wants, because sherry is not about the fruit, it's about the process. For sweet styles, we also see Pedro Ximénez, often just called PX, and Muscat of Alexandria. Our PX is a thin-skinned, rather neutral-flavored grape as well. But it does take to sun drying well and is mainly grown in neighboring Montilla Moriles, but is allowed back in Jerez for sherry production. Now, a bit of Muscat is grown too, and it's often treated similar to our PX, even with those different aromatics. As far as the winemaking, the fork in the road for our Palomino production starts by aiming for a dry, neutral white base wine fermented in stainless steel to about 11 to 12% ABV. Once fermentation is complete, the winemaker classifies the wines. This is the moment of destiny where the wine takes one of 2 paths based on its style potential. This first classification will determine whether we're going to go biological aging or oxidative aging. Now, our lighter, brighter, pale wines are selected for biological aging. These will be fortified to 15 to 15.5% ABV. Why this specific number? Because it's the perfect strength to allow flor to survive. Flor is a layer of yeast that forms a thick skin on the surface of the wine. It feeds on alcohol and oxygen and protects the wine from oxidation while releasing distinct flavors of bread, biscuit, and dough. Now, this has already started to happen naturally for pretty much all the newly fermented wines. On the oxidative aging side, the darker wines are selected for this path, and they are fortified to 17% ABV. At this strength, the flor cannot survive. These wines are exposed directly to oxygen, causing them to turn brown and develop flavors of toffee, leather, and walnut. Now, Usually the wines hang out here for a while in the sobre table or on the table. So if we can see if that flora is going to develop well, and if the wine has the character we want. And if not, we do a second classification and send those ones that don't have good flora back along the oxidative aging path. Now quickly over to the PX styles. These are our sweet styles using sun-dried or raisined grapes. As you might expect, we have so much sugar here at pressing that we can't get a strong fermentation or ever get these to ferment dry. We get to maybe 1 to 2% ABV maybe, and then fortify to 17%. Now, regardless of the path, oxidative or biological, the wine enters the Solera system. This is a method of fractional blending found in the large cooler warehouses or bodegas of Jerez. Now imagine rows of oak barrels stacked on top of each other. The bottom row is actually the Solera containing the oldest wine, and the rows above are criaderas or nurseries. When wine is drawn from the Solera for bottling, it is replenished by the row above, which is replenished by the row above that. The number of rows can vary, and these criaderas can go for decades, if not centuries, continually producing wine. Now, most producers will have a number of independent Soleras for options in blending and style creation. This system achieves two critical things, one being consistency. The style remains the same year after year from each of these Soleras. Blending and bottling can be done on a flexible time frame as well. And then flora survival. For biologically aged wines, the introduction of young wine provides new nutrients to keep the yeast alive. Now, there are some key styles and law requirements that you'll need to know. Our dry styles, we have Fino and Manzanilla. These undergo biological aging only. They are pale lemon, dry, and tangy with aromas of dough and almonds. Manzanilla is a specific Fino style from the coastal town of Sanlúcar de Barrameda. Then we have Oloroso. This undergoes oxidative aging only, so no flor. It is brown, full-bodied, and smells like toffee, spice, and leather. Then we have Amontillado, which is the hybrid. It starts under flor like a Fino, but is then refortified to 17% to kill the yeast, allowing it to finish aging oxidatively. It combines yeast character with nutty complexity. Now, this style likely came about when you accidentally let your flora die and your biological aging became oxidative. There's also a Pelo Cortado, which is a rare style, and it's defined as having the aroma of Amontillado, but the body and richness of an Oloroso. Then over to our sweet styles, our Pedro Jimenez, or our PX. This is going to be a naturally sweet wine. The grapes have been sun-dried to concentrate sugar, and it's almost black, viscous, and it tastes of dried fruit, figs, and coffee. Then we have sweetened sherries. These are dry wines that have been sweetened. Pale cream is usually Fino, sweetened with RCGM, basically grape syrup. Medium and cream sherries are usually Amontillado or Oloroso blends sweetened with PX. So let's take a quick overview. Imagine I just got hired on to a big sherry house that makes all of these styles. Here's how I get this done. First of all, I have to have a distiller buddy who makes brandy de Jerez from a Ren, maybe, where I can get 95% neutral spirit from. Then I need another guy who crushes grapes and concentrates the juice into my syrupy RCGM. But the rest I'm doing in my bodega with a number of Soleras. Now out east on the hot plains, I have my sun-dried PX that I pull, crush, press, partially ferment, fortify to 17%, and put that into a Solera. Now I'm pulling PX from the bottom for bottling, but I also have it on hand as an ingredient. Now I'm pulling Palomino from my number of vineyards, all with slightly different ripeness, character, etc. I taste the fermented wine from the batches and do my first classification. I've probably already taken my higher quality cooler plots and done a cooler, gentler fermentation for a few batches as well. I already have floor starting because it's everywhere ambiently. And my liveliest wines, I want to make Fino. I fortify with my neutral spirit to 15%, which only takes like 3 to 4% by volume of that high neutral spirit, and let it hang out a bit in the sobretabla. Now, some of it maybe really doesn't seem to want to work, the flavor or the floor, it's just not doing it for me. So I send those back over to my Oloroso batch that I'll come back to in a minute. So I take the other stuff, I put it in my criadera at the top. While I'm there, I happen to do some checking, and I have found that some of my Fino barrels aren't doing so hot. The floor is dying off, so I take this partially made Fino and throw it in another criadera where it will do some oxidative aging and become Amontillado. But back at my Fino criadera, I know that some is ready, and I've got to make room for what I'm putting in, or I have orders to fill, so I pull some Fino off from the bottom for bottling. But I also know that we do sell some pale cream. So some of that Fino, I add some sweet RCGM to, and it's bottled as pale cream. I have basically made my dry Fino and a sweet Fino at the same time. Now I go back over to my Amontillado and pull some of it from the bottom. Now it's dry as well, remember. Now with Fino character and oxidative character, and off it goes to be bottled as Amontillado. But I also take some and blend in some of my sweet PX and bottle up a medium. Sweet, some biological, and some oxidative character here. Now I go all the way back to my freshly fermented Palomino batches, to the ones that didn't go down the Fino or biological aging road. These guys, I don't want to mess with finicky floor, so I'm fortifying these batches to 17% ABV. To this, I'm adding to those ones from the Fino sobretabla that weren't doing so well, and I've bumped them up to 17% to kill any remaining floor. Now all of these go into an oxidative criadera. There's more airspace in the barrels. Like in the other criaderos, to make room for these wines, I need to empty some out. So I pull out some Oloroso from the bottom, and off it goes to bottling as Oloroso. Now this is dry, brown, leathery, and concentrated wines. But I still have a market for sweeter styles here, so I add in some of my PX to sweeten some of it, and now I have a cream sherry as well. Now, there is an effort to blur the requirement for purely oxidative character from our creams and that biological and oxidative from our mediums, but this pretty much outlines how traditionally it has always been done. Anyway, this is all in all too much work, so I decided to move to Portugal. Okay, let's travel west to Portugal to the Douro Valley. If sherry is about aging, port is about rapid extraction and interrupted fermentation. As far as the natural factors, the climate and the grapes, the Douro region is divided into 3 sub-regions: Biaxo Corgo, Cima Corgo, and Douro Superior. The climate is a warm continental climate, shielded from the Atlantic rain by the Sierra de Mararo Mountains. The terrain is incredibly steep, with vines planted on terraces supported by stone walls, called socalcos, or earth banks, called paramares. A difference here is that production and maturation don't always happen in the same location. These warm vineyard environments are not as desired for long, slow maturation as the region down on the cooler, more humid coast, although air conditioning has recently allowed that to change in some cases. Port is usually a blend, and there are 5 key red grapes you need to know: Touriga Franca, Tinto Roriz, Touriga Nacional, Tinto Cao, and Tinta Barroca. These are generally small, thick-skinned berries, high in color and tannin. Now, as far as the human factors, in the winemaking process, the defining feature of port production is fortification to stop fermentation. When the alcohol reaches 5 to 9%, the winemaker adds aguardiente, which is a 77% ABV grape spirit. Notice how this is not a neutral spirit. And here we have to add like 20% of the volume here compared to sherry. This still kills the yeast, leaving significant residual sugar in the wine and raising the alcohol to 19 up to 22%. Now, the challenge, fermentation only lasts like 24 to 48 hours before the spirit is added. Winemakers have a very short window to extract all that color, flavor, and tannins from the skins. Therefore, extraction techniques must be vigorous. Now, the traditional foot treading method, this happened in shallow granite troughs called lagares. It provides intense extraction without crushing the seeds, which would release bitter oils. Then we have these auto-vinifiers. These are fascinating pump-over light devices that don't require electric pumps. You do a quick crush and into a sealed stainless steel tank that uses the CO2 pressure produced by fermentation to pump juice into a tank above the cap. Once full, it dumps it back over the cap automatically. More CO2, more pushing, more dumping, and this can happen every 15 to 20 minutes. Now, we will often incorporate some mechanical stirrers or paddles to help with extraction here. Then we move to piston plungers and robotic lagares. Now, these are modern mechanical methods designed to mimic the action of human feet for maximum extraction. Many have little foot-shaped smashers to try and mimic the traditional extraction methods. Now, these will also usually have a pump-over feature as well. So now we go to maturation. Once fortified, the wine is typically sent downriver to the coastal city of Vila Nova de Gaia for maturation, and where the climate is cooler. We split port into two main families based on aging. We have our ruby styles, which have protective aging. These wines are deeply colored and fruit-forward, black fruit and spice. They're aged in large oak vessels or stainless steel to prevent oxygen contact. Our ruby is pretty simple, fruity, inexpensive. Our reserve ruby is higher quality, a little better alcohol integration. Now, it's not measured as such, but this is determined by an official tasting panel. Then we have our late bottled vintage, or LBVs. These are wines from a single vintage, aged 4 to 6 years in wood before bottling. Now, most of these are filtered and are ready to drink on release. Then we have vintage port, and this is the pinnacle. These are made from the best grapes of a single declared exceptional year. They spend a short time in wood, maybe 36 months, and are bottled unfiltered. These wines will age in the bottle for decades, developing cooked fruit and vegetal notes. They must be decanted, as you will want to know for your exam. Then we have our tawny styles, which are known for oxidative aging. These wines are aged in smaller barrels called pipes. This allows oxygen to attack the wine, turning the color from ruby to tawny or brown amber, and changing the fruit flavors to walnut, coffee, and caramel. Our starting category tawny is generally lighter than ruby, but often it's not even aged oxidatively. These can be made from lighter grapes or with less extraction techniques. Then we move into the tawny with indication of age. These can be labeled as 10, 20, 30, or 40 years old. Note that this is an average age of the blend, not a minimum, and this label must be approved by that regulatory tasting panel. Finally, let's look at the Fortified Muscats. Unlike the neutral Palomino of sherry or the tannic blends of port, Muscat is an aromatic white varietal. The goal here is to retain that primary floral and grapey character of the fruit. The grapes are crushed and occasionally may see some skin contact. Fermentation is stopped by fortification to retain sweetness. Now, there are two distinctive styles you will want to know for the exam. The youthful styles, like the Muscat de Beaume de Venise, these are located in the southern Rhone region of France. Here we are picking ripe, healthy grapes that have not been raisined. We crush, and maybe we have a little bit of skin contact for some texture, but we're wanting bright Muscat character here. We stop fermentation with grape spirit and store protected from oxygen in inert vessels. These are sweet, usually not quite to the luscious stage, and then pale gold, and they taste of those fresh grapes, peach, and floral perfume. These are released for immediate consumption. Then we will see fully developed aged styles, as in a Rutherglen Muscat. Rutherglen is located in Australia. These are very different. The grapes are harvested late, sometimes slightly raisined for extra sugar concentration. At only about 1 to 2% ABV, we stop fermentation by fortification and then age oxidatively in old wood, sometimes in a more warm condition. The result here is deep amber or brown color, viscous and intensely sweet, with complex flavors of dried fruit, nuts, and even syrup. We will occasionally add a little younger wine to balance out those tertiary notes and just to give a little balancy hint of fresh muscat character. So let's summarize the key takeaways here for your examination. Now, we explored sherry, where the key production factor is the Solaris system and the biological action of flor. Remember the difference between the 15% ABV fortification for Fino and the 17% ABV for Oloroso, biological versus oxidative. Then we looked at port, where the key is rapid extraction. Because fermentation is interrupted early with aguardiente to keep the wine sweet, winemakers use vigorous methods like foot treading or robotic lagares to get the color and tannin they need. We distinguish between the fruit-led ruby styles and the oxidative tawny styles. And then finally muscat, where the style depends on whether the winemaker wants to preserve the fresh floral aromas, like in the Baume de Venise, or develop deep raisin-like complexity through oxidative aging, like in Rutherglen. Fortified wines are wines of process. Whether it's the growth of yeast on a floor or the long oxidative aging of a 20-year-old tawny, these wines offer flavor profiles you just simply cannot find in unfortified wines. Thanks for listening. Good luck with your studies.